Space disasters do not always arrive as explosions. Sometimes they begin with a switch left in the wrong position, a stuck valve, a failed automatic system, the capsule descending just a few degrees off course. And sometimes the crew survives only because they make the right decision in a matter of seconds, while the spacecraft around them becomes a machine they can no longer trust. We remember the famous tragedies: Apollo-1, Soyuz 1, Soyuz 11, Challenger, Columbia. But buried deeper in the history of spaceflight are other moments. Incidents that came terrifyingly close to becoming front-page disasters, but instead faded into technical reports, crew memoirs, and forgotten recovery logs. Tonight, we look at three of them. A spacecraft trapped in an icy lake. A triumphant international mission that nearly poisoned its crew on the way home. And the first spacewalk, which ended not with celebration, but with two cosmonauts stranded in a frozen forest surrounded by darkness. These are three little-known space mission close calls that almost ended in silence. October 1976. The Soviet Union launches Soyuz 23, carrying cosmonauts Vyacheslav Zhukov and Valery Rozhdestvensky. Their destination is Salyut 5, a military space station orbiting high above Earth. The plan is routine, at least by the standards of spaceflight. Launch, rendezvous, dock, enter the station, begin the mission. But in orbit, routine is only a word people use before something goes wrong. As Soyuz 23 approaches Salyut 5, the spacecraft's automatic docking system fails to bring the capsule in correctly. The cosmonauts are close enough to see their destination, but not close enough to safely enter it. The mission cannot continue. They are ordered to come home. For the crew, disappointment now becomes survival. Soyuz's re-entry is violent, but familiar. The capsule plunges into the atmosphere, wrapped in fire, falling toward the vast Soviet recovery zone. But on this night, there is fog. There is snow. There is snow. There is bitter cold. And beneath the descending capsule, there is not solid ground. There is Lake Tengiz, a shallow, freezing lake in Kazakhstan, covered with broken ice. At 17:45 UTC on October 16th, 1976, Soyuz 23 splashes down in the dark. It is the first unplanned water landing of a crewed Soviet spacecraft. The capsule is designed to survive many kinds of landings, but this one creates a nightmare. The parachute, heavy with water, begins dragging the capsule. The antennas are submerged, making communication nearly impossible. The hatch is difficult to open because the capsule is tilted and partially trapped. Outside, rescue crews are fighting fog, darkness, ice, and freezing water. Inside, Zhukov and Rozhdestvensky wait. They have returned from space, but they are not safe. Imagine the sound inside that capsule. Not the triumphant voices of recovery teams. Not applause from mission control. Just a creak of metal. The slosh of water. The fading warmth of a spacecraft never meant to become a lifeboat. Outside, helicopters search through fog. Boats struggle through ice. Rescue teams try to reach the capsule, but the lake refuses to cooperate. The cosmonauts are only a few miles from shore, but distance means nothing when the surface between you and rescue is a field of black water and broken ice. Hours pass. The capsule grows colder. The crew cannot simply open the hatch and swim. The water is near freezing. Exposure could kill them quickly. The parachute lines and the position of the spacecraft make escape dangerous. They are alive inside a metal sphere. They are also trapped inside it. Finally, after a long and brutal recovery effort, the capsule is pulled from the lake. The cosmonauts survive. The mission is officially a failure because it never docks with Salyut 5. But in another sense, Soyuz 23 is one of the most remarkable successes in spaceflight history. Not because everything worked, because almost everything after landing became harder than expected, and the crew still came home alive. The eerie lesson of Soyuz 23 is simple. In spaceflight, danger does not end when the parachutes open. Sometimes the deadliest part begins after the spacecraft has already returned to Earth. One year before Soyuz 23, the world watched a very different kind of mission. Apollo-Soyuz. In July 1975, an American Apollo spacecraft and a Soviet Soyuz capsule met in orbit. It was the first crewed international space mission, a symbolic handshake above a divided world. For the United States, the crew was Tom Stafford, Vance Brand, and Deke Slayton. For the Soviet Union, Alexei Leonov and Valery Kubasov. The mission was a triumph of engineering and diplomacy. Two rival superpowers, still locked in the Cold War, had managed to dock spacecraft in orbit and open the hatch between them. The images were historic. Smiles, flags, handshake, peace. But spaceflight has no interest in symbolism. When the joint mission ended, the Soviet crew returned separately. The American Apollo spacecraft continued toward its own re-entry and splashdown. The mission seemed nearly complete. Then, during descent, something went wrong. Apollo's reaction control thrusters, small engines used to control the spacecraft's attitude, were still active longer than they should have been. Their propellants included toxic chemicals. During the parachute descent, fumes were drawn into the cabin through the spacecraft's ventilation system. The crew began breathing poison. Nitrogen tetroxide is not the kind of danger you can ignore. It is corrosive. It attacks the lungs. It can cause delayed pulmonary edema, a condition where fluid builds inside the lungs after exposure. Inside the Apollo capsule, the astronauts felt burning in their eyes, faces, throats, and lungs. Vance Brand briefly lost consciousness. Stafford moved for the emergency oxygen masks. There was no dramatic explosion, no shattered spacecraft, no fireball streaking across the sky. Just three men inside a descending capsule, breathing something that did not belong in human lungs. And beneath them, the Pacific Ocean waited. Apollo splashed down safely. To anyone watching from a distance, the mission had ended well. The capsule was recovered. The crew was aboard the recovery ship. The final Apollo flight was over. But during the welcoming ceremony, something was wrong. The astronauts did not look like returning heroes. They looked sick. Only then did the full seriousness of the incident become clear. The crew had inhaled toxic propellant fumes during their descent. They were later hospitalized in Hawaii. The world had just watched a mission of peace. But behind the smiles and ceremony, Apollo-Soyuz had nearly ended as the final tragedy of the Apollo era. It nearly ended as the final tragedy of the Apollo era. What makes this close call so unsettling is how late it happened. Not during launch, not during docking, not during re-entry plasma blackout. It happened when the spacecraft was already descending under parachutes, when the crew had every reason to believe the most dangerous part of the mission was behind them. Spaceflight punishes assumptions. The Apollo-Soyuz incident became a case study in checklists, cockpit communication. Toxic exposure and the hidden danger of spacecraft systems at sea. Harmless until the environment changes. A valve, a switch, a few moments of confusion during a noisy descent. That was enough. Enough to turn a historic homecoming into a medical emergency. Enough to remind NASA that even victory can arrive carrying poison. March 18, 1965. The Soviet Union launches Voskhod 2 with 2 cosmonauts aboard, Pavel Belyaev and Alexei Leonov. Their mission will make history. Leonov is about to become the first human being to walk in space. The spacecraft carries an inflatable airlock, a temporary chamber attached to the side of the capsule. Leonov enters it, the hatch closes behind him, and the airlock depressurizes. Then he opens the outer hatch. For the first time, a human floats freely above Earth. For 12 minutes and 9 seconds, Leonov is outside the spacecraft. The achievement is staggering. But while the world would remember the first spacewalk as a triumph, Leonov was living through a private emergency. His spacesuit had expanded in the vacuum. It had become stiff. Bloated. Difficult to control. When Leonov tried to return to the airlock, he could not fit properly. The first man to walk in space was now struggling to get back inside. There is a particular kind of fear that belongs only to space. It is the fear of seeing safety inches away and not being able to reach it. Leonov made a dangerous decision. He manually reduced the pressure inside his suit, risking decompression sickness, so that it would become flexible enough to squeeze back through the hatch. He entered headfirst, against procedure. Inside the airlock, he had to twist his body around in a cramped space while overheated, exhausted, and under extreme pressure. He made it back. The first spacewalk had nearly become the first death in open space. But Voskhod 2 was not finished with him. The spacecraft's automatic re-entry system failed. Belyaev and Leonov had to perform a manual re-entry, something that had never before been done on a crewed Soviet mission in quite this way. They fired the retro-rockets manually. They returned to Earth. But not where they were supposed to. The capsule came down in the Ural region, deep in the snowy taiga. There was no recovery team waiting, no open landing field, no immediate helicopter pickup, just forest, snow, cold, and 2 exhausted cosmonauts inside a spacecraft that had landed far from where anyone expected it to be. Search aircraft eventually spotted them, but the trees were too dense for helicopters to land. The rescue crews could see them. They could not reach them. Night came. Temperatures dropped. The hatch had been blown open by explosive bolts, making it harder to keep warm. The spacecraft's electrical systems were failing. The fans ran, but the heater did not. Leonov and Belyaev spent the night in the freezing forest. Soviet accounts later emphasized another detail, one that sounds almost too cinematic to be true. The forest contained wolves and bears, and it was mating season, a time when animals could be more aggressive. The cosmonauts had a pistol in their survival kit. The first human to walk in space had returned to Earth and now might have to defend himself from animals in the snow. The next day, rescuers reached them on skis, but evacuation still was not immediate. The forest was too dense. A landing area had to be prepared. Leonov and Belyaev spent another night in the taiga before skiing out to a place where helicopters could finally retrieve them. The mission was celebrated as a victory, and it was, but only barely. A suit that swelled in vacuum, a manual re-entry, a landing far off course, a frozen forest, a rescue that took days instead of minutes. Voskhod 2 is remembered for the first spacewalk. It should also be remembered as one of the strangest survival stories in human spaceflight. Should also be remembered as one of the strangest Soyuz 23, Apollo-Soyuz, Voskhod 2. 3 missions from different nations, different years, and different eras of spaceflight. Each one survived, and because they survived, they became quieter stories, not disasters, not memorials, not names carved into tragedy, but close calls. The kind that remind us how thin the line really is. The spacecraft can travel above the atmosphere, cross oceans, dock with another nation's machine in orbit, and carry humans beyond the world they were born on. But it can still be defeated by fog, by fumes, by ice, by silence, and by one small thing going wrong at exactly the wrong time.